Okay, hello. I'm so sorry about that. I swear every single time I get on here a half hour early and there's still all kinds of things that just pop up. Anyways, today has been a crazy day and I'm excited that I'm finally here. It's working and I really appreciate everyone waiting. I know that it's over 15 minutes now, so my deepest apologies. I actually want to start this live by lighting a few plants that were given to me by some of you. There's been a lot of strange energy today, and I just need to really clear it and focus on good plant love with people who want to hear about it. So I'm actually lighting some herbs that were given to me by 4 different patrons, and I really appreciate that. Like, being able to enjoy plants that were grown and stewarded by you all is one of the most special things I could possibly imagine. So thank you so much. I also have a few plants with me today because they're so beautiful, they smell so good, we're going to talk about them, and they've really been helping me hold some boundaries today. So at any time, please feel free to ask a question. I will, of course, prioritize the ones that I have written down, but I'm happy to answer any of your questions about the questions that we're discussing, so please feel free to ask. Alrighty, so I got 2 of the same-ish questions about books, so I'm going to go over those first. Someone asked if I had an updated list of herbal reference books. I don't have a list. I've always felt resistance towards that, only because I get a lot of older books, and so I want to tell you all about the books that I look for so that you can look for those kinds of books, if that makes sense. The same way that when teaching about herbalism, rather than teaching about 5 plants that maybe don't grow in your area, you have a harder time accessing them, I would rather talk about 5 energetics, 5 categories of plants. That way you can take those categories and find plants that are accessible to you or grow in your area that you can apply that information to. So I sort of feel that way about books. So when I do make a list of herbal references, I will probably write it in such a way that's like, these are the topics that I think are important to cover. These are some of my favorites, but look for XYZ. And the reason being, I don't love a lot of modern herbal authors. I feel bad saying that, and it's nothing against them. It's just that I would rather get to their source, right? Their teachers, where their knowledge is coming from. And not even just their teachers, but their teachers' teachers, right? So I really try to find old books. We have a really big used bookstore near us, and oftentimes it will be like a plant nerd or a doctor that drops off like a whole big thing of these crazy vintage books on anatomy and just everything exciting. So I'm going to go over some of my favorite books and some of my favorite categories of books. And I also got a question that was just, what are some of your favorite books, not only herbal related? So to answer that one real quick, and I'm sure you all have heard a million herbalists say this, but my number 1 absolute favorite book of all time is Braiding Sweetgrass. And if you haven't read it, then you haven't heard enough people tell you that. It is one of the most incredible books if you are enchanted by the plant world, and if you are interested in the way of relation to the land, right? So she does an incredible job with that book, and she actually reads it. If you get it on Audible, or if you get the Audible version of it, the author reads it, and I think that's really special. So let's go over some of my favorite. Where I live in the South, a lot of the herbal influence here comes directly from. Just want to make sure my dogs weren't going to freak out. Indigenous people who were here before us, and then also slaves. So I try to find a lot of older books written by, or at least that contain the text of indigenous people from my region, and homesteaders of my region too. So a lot of times I'm digging for old books over authors. I hope I expressed that well. But that said, I do also have a niche love for herbalism in the South, and for that reason, these two books are incredible. Southern Folk Medicine by Phyllis Light. Phyllis Light is in Alabama? Yes. She's a great herbalist. She's hard to explain. She's very well respected in the herbal community. A lot of her teachers were strictly Southern people who were passing down herbal traditions and knowledge of very, very like hyper native local plants. So if you're in my region, these are some good ones. I haven't finished this one yet, but I really enjoy the history of herbalism. As I mentioned, a lot of slaves in the South are where we get a lot of remedies. So a lot of the plants here in the South have indigenous names that were given to them, but a lot of the remedies that we know of and use came from slaves who literally had to figure out how to keep white women's children alive, themselves and their families and their communities alive, food, etc. And this book has a lot of little tidbits of history in it. So this is a book that I'm really excited about. Even though it's about the West Coast region, it's going to be similar to braiding sweetgrass in that it's knowledge that anyone can apply to their practice, because more than plants, it is going over plant practices, land-based practices. So this book I'm so excited about. Let me find a good portion to read to you all. So, Tending the Wild, Native American Knowledge and the Management of California's Natural Resources. A highly significant, one might argue revolutionary book, it has the potential to completely change the way Western land managers relate to the land and the resources that they are trying to regulate. Even more, it has the power to influence the way that all of us approach nature, and it will underline the importance of Native Americans and the sophistication of their knowledge. So, I'm thinking this is going to be a great follow-up to braiding sweetgrass for a lot of you. Something that I always say is like, anyone can identify a plant, right? We can do it on apps on our phones now, online. We can get field guides. But how, like, what you do from there is, to me, what makes you significant as an herbalist / land steward. So that's what a lot of these books are more so about. If I had to choose a favorite author, it would be Arthur Haynes. I honestly have no idea how this man's name is not circulating more in the herbalism world. He only has 2 books, I'm pretty sure, but you can find a lot of podcasts with him. He's got some really cool organizations. Very, very smart person. Really great guy. He's in Maine, if I'm not mistaken. So for those of you that are closer to the Northeast, he'll be great for you. A lot of the plants that he highlights in this book are not plants that grow near me, but I actually think that that's a really important thing for people to learn, is to learn about plant genuses, and to learn about plants that maybe are in your area but look different other places. So for example, reading through this book, I was able to go, oh, we have that, it just looks different. Or I was able to, when traveling, find plants that I've never seen before and identify, which is something that my husband is always blown away by. But because I love learning about plants, not just in my area, I can typically at least get close to identifying something I've never seen before in a different region. So I think it's really important to learn backwards, if that makes sense. And so he does a really great job in this book with each plant monograph, sort of talking about the plant families, the genus, how you identify it, when to use it, which part to harvest, etc. Now, the next two books I'm going to show you are definitely textbook style, and if you are a beginning herbalist, please do not feel like you need to buy these books. These books are not something that I invested in until I was investing in my clinical practice. However, if you are someone like me who does get really excited about the more sciencey chemist parts of applying plants and anatomy, then you might want to. So these are The Energetics of Western Herbs by Peter Holmes, volumes 1 and 2. These are big, expensive books. I believe this is $200. I can't remember. Incredible books though. And this is the kind of thing where there's no history, there's no lore, there's none of that stuff. There's no, here's how you identify it. It is literally, it'll be like, oh, this plant, its actions, its energetics, how to use it, what to use it for, etc. Very, very textbook style. And I think it's important to have a couple of those on your shelf if you are practicing in that matter. Rosemary Gladstar. Now, I would recommend Rosemary Gladstar's books and work for anyone who is a beginner herbalist. She is really good at laying out the foundations in a really easily comprehensible way. Also, her books are pretty straightforward, like Herbal Healing for Women, Herbal Healing for Men, teas for vibrant health and skin, stuff like that, really niche. So those are my faves. Oh! Okay, let me look at some of your questions. Okay, Victoria, I'm definitely going to get to your question. I definitely discussed it in length in the last live Q&A. Actually, I feel like I've discussed this question a little bit in each one, if you want to check those out. But I know I did it in the last one. But I try to go over this a lot because I don't want it to be something where you all feel like every time you identify and find a plant, you then have to stop and look up which part to harvest, when to harvest that part, etc. Because that's where it just gets way too overwhelming. So I want you to be able to intuitively think about which part of the plant to harvest and when. So I'm going to do the same analogy that I do, and I actually have an illustration that I'll post to Patreon after this that I had someone make for me. But basically, imagine the 4 seasons, okay? Early spring, when we're still getting frosts, we're seeing these teeny little sprouts come out. Teeny little sprouts. And then we're seeing like just the leaves get bushier and bushier. A stalk hasn't come up yet. They're just starting to really like spread out. At that point, you're going to want to harvest the leaves because that's what the plant is using its energy to do, is to grow those leaves, spread them out, and build the foundation for the stalk if it's a flower. Late spring, early summer is when we're going to start to see those flowers shoot up that stalk. And at that moment, you're going to want to harvest the stalk. That's where that plant is putting all of its energy towards pushing that stalk up, making it really big and strong so it can hold that flower head. Then in the, summer right now is when we're seeing these flower heads that are just big and beautiful and wide open and sticky. And that's when you're going to want to harvest the flower head. Then the flowers will go to seed, and that's when the seeds hold the most value. I'm thinking right now specifically of like calendula and nettle. Nettle is a good one to imagine because you can use the leaves, the stalk, the flowering parts, the seeds, and then the roots. So after the roots, when the stalks die down, or not after the roots, after the seeds, when the stalks die down in the winter, the plant is storing everything in its roots, and that's when we harvest root medicine, is in the fall and winter. Now, of course, there are situations like you mentioned, example, ashwagandha is only used for root. So those tell us by the name. For example, you don't say calendula flower or nettle leaves, it's just calendula or nettle. However, we commonly hear shatavari root, ashwagandha root, and that's because we're only using the root of that plant for medicine. So in some cases, you're only going to use one part of the plant, but in most cases, you can use all parts of the plant. For example, with goldenrod, calendula, nettle, yarrow, basically every plant I can think of right now, we harvest the leaves in the spring, the stalks and the flowers in the summer, and even the roots in the fall and the winter, and sometimes the seeds, etc. So keep that visualization with you when you are out looking at plants right now, like flowering plants. I feel like when plants are only used for a certain part, it's a lot of times those things like astragalus, shatavari, ashwagandha, where we're not necessarily going to go find that wild. We're going to have to seek that out, buy the seeds, and plant it with intention of harvesting a certain part of it. So let me know if that answers your question, or if there's a part of that you want to hear a little bit more about. Julia, botany books. So do you want like just a straightforward botany book, or do you want there to be some information about the plants too? Because hold on, these books by Arthur Haynes, Ancestral Plants Volumes 1 and 2, these are wonderful botany books because he gives you a lot more information than just the botany side. They're not dry, you know what I mean? So these are my go-tos for that. Alright. Ideas on what to do with an abundance of comfrey. I can't remember who asked this, but I know I mentioned in the chat room on Discord that we talked a lot about comfrey in the the whole last live Q&A. I want to say the first 15 minutes the most, but most of that live Q&A we talked about comfrey. Comfrey is interesting because it's not like calendula or yarrow where you can use it for everything under the sun. It's got pretty specific uses. So if you have an abundance of it, I would recommend drying it and vacuum sealing it so you can pull for it when you need it. Otherwise, what you can do right now is, of course, make a really nice comfrey oil that you can make a salve from, or just use the oil of when you have an injury that you can use comfrey for. I'm really into the idea right now of using vacuum sealers to save herbs, because I used to be like, oh, I gotta use this plant fresh right now, and then I would make way more of something than I needed to, especially because as a herbalist I have a lot of course I have all of my things infusing for the products that I offer, but I also am just obsessed with plants and learning, so I have a lot of infusions that never see the store. And so I make a lot of them because I want to use the fresh plant, and I'm trying to get out of that habit. And so we can keep dried herbs really nice and fresh by vacuum sealing them and storing them in tubs in a dark place away from the sun. So that would be my recommendation for anyone with any kind of abundance of herbs right now. Okay, Julia, the best book, what is the name? I think the name is Botany Now. Oh, I'm going to have to Google it real quick. I can see the cover of this book and the guy's face. He even has like a card game for kids. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, holler. Yes, okay, it's Botany in a Day by Thomas J. Epple. Yep. Oh yeah, Chelsea, that's a great idea. I have never had an abundance of like the right comfrey for making garden tea. I have so much wild comfrey near me, and whenever I grow comfrey, the animals eat it. So I haven't yet experimented with making the comfrey tea for my plants. I've done it with nettle though, but that's a great idea. And yeah, Botany in a Day, Julia, would be my absolute top recommendation for learning plant families. I mean, even just watching his videos, like he's great. He's very much like anyone can learn plants by learning the plant families. He's very passionate about it. He's got children's books about it. He's great. Okay. I really like this next question. Actually, I've got two really good questions coming up. Best way to transplant plants from the wild. This is something that I am highly versed in because we live next to a game reserve and they are actively logging that game reserve right now, which has been devastating to say the least. That's like totally one of our happy places. Lots of beautiful trails through there, and they're just completely clear cutting. So I have been rescuing a lot of plants from there. And I think the biggest mistake that people make with transplanting any kind of plants is we assume that if the aerial parts of the plant die during transplant, that they're done for. In my experience, transplanting wild plants especially, they're typically growing in dusty, hard clay soil, and those roots go through quite an adjustment period moving, but they're more than likely going to stay alive. However, the aerial part of the plant is not, because those roots are going to be working really, really hard on adjusting and sending up a healthier plant once they've adjusted. So I just cut the aerial parts. And typically when I'm transplanting something that I want to use anyways. For example, I've been transplanting a ton of mountain mint, Monarda, yarrow, Pennsylvania everlasting, St. John's wort. So I'll just cut the tops off, and then I've just got these little roots, and I'll plant those. And you just want to make sure that the little top of the root can see the sunshine. When you plant it, give it a good soak as soon as you transplant it, and it should come back. I honestly have not had many transplants totally fail. But if you don't cut those aerial parts off, it'll take a lot longer because they will have to go through that whole process of dying and dissolving and then regrowing. My other recommendation is think about the environment that you're taking them out of, and think about the environment that you're putting them into. For example, the only part of our property that is anything like the where we're transplanting from, which is like rocky, rough soil with like all day sunlight, is our driveway. The rest of our property is very shaded and moist and has good soil now because of all the gardening that we've done. So if I'm transplanting, let's just say goldenrod or yarrow from the wild, I'm probably going to put them at the top of my driveway in that really rocky soil where they get that full sunshine. However, if I'm transplanting something like Maidenhair Fern or black cohosh, I'm definitely not going to want to put it in full sun at the top of my driveway. I'm going to want to put it in the environment that I took it out of, which is going to be like dense woods, lots of shade, nearby trees. That would be the second biggest mistake I think people make, is transplanting a wild plant and putting it in their garden with really nice compost and all that when they are like, what is this fancy shit? So that's my recommendation there. The next good question, they're all good questions. I'm just particularly excited about some of these. Suggestions on the best way to stay organized with herbal notes. Okay, if you're here, let me know what kind of herbal notes you're taking, but otherwise I'm just gonna cover all of them here, or at least my favorites. So one of the first things that we did when we moved here, and I would recommend this to anyone if you move to a new area or if you're just getting into, identifying plants in your area, start your own calendar. And you can do that by, like most phones right now, Droids and iPhones have it to where you can make a caption or a note right on a photo. So take photos of every plant you see. A lot of people use those plant identification apps, and those automatically save those photos for you. So one, you could screenshot it on those apps, or two, a plant, write a little note. You can write just the name of it. What I like to do, my iPhone does this for me, is it typically tells me what day I found it, where I was when I found it. But you can also write those things down. It really comes in handy for planning and preparing for making things. It looks like I've got a little bit of a lag going on. Uh-oh. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not seeing anybody say they can't, so I'm gonna keep going. But I just forgot what I was saying. Okay, herbal notes. So that's a great way to track if what you're interested in is plant identification. And even if you're not actually going out and finding these plants and taking photos, there's a lot of websites. I'm thinking of one in particular, Herbal. Oh, it's got a sunshine logo. I can't remember what it's called. But they have a lot of like those little photos. I know you guys have seen at least one that's like calendula. It has a photo of it and then like some bullet points of the uses. That would be another thing I would recommend, is when you hear me talk about a plant on a plant walk or someone else, or you're researching a plant, don't try to retain every single use that it has. Write down like a couple things that you hear and you're like, ooh, you're excited by it, or you think about a way you can apply it, something important to you. That is what's going to help you remember those plants. So other note taking, I had a really good recommendation and now I can't remember what it was. I've gone through so many different phases of note taking, but I will say probably my largest collection of notes is on my computer in a file where I'll save like little things on the internet I see, like the taste wheel and other people's writings about plants, maybe some slides from classes I've taken, and then I always take notes on my curriculum for classes and whatnot, so everything's kind of right there online. And it's all kind of organized by like anatomy, chemistry, botany, etc. If I try to constrict myself to one notebook, it just gets chaotic. I forget it sometimes, so don't do that to yourself. I also am a huge fan of taking notes on my phone. And another thing that I'll do if I'm not in a position to stop and type the notes on my phone is I'll use the voice memos on my phone to kind of leave a note to myself for later. And then in all those books that I showed you guys, I have little notes and tabs where I'm like, come back to this later, use this for this, etc. So organizing might be the wrong thing for me to say that I do, but I do love note taking. I leave little traces of them all over the place. But I would say the most important thing, other than like thinking about organization, is think about the parts that you like best, the parts that you can apply and use now. Because some information, I'm like, oh, that's cool, but I'm probably not going to use that anytime soon. Whereas other things you hear and you have kids at home or animals or a garden or something, and you're like, ooh, I want to make sure I do that. So I will say on my phone, I do have like a note on homesteading, animals, kids, me. Oh, actually, I've got some good stuff. Let me think about this for another minute. Okay, so I have a note on my phone called Identified Plants. And every single time that I identify a plant, I put it there and I put a couple of the uses, like I mentioned, a few bullet points. And that's really nice because say someone's like, ooh, I just found this plant. What does it do? I'm like, I know it, but I can't. I need a refresher. I can pull that up, and then I'm like, there it is. So anyways, none of that was organized, and the question was organized, but that's my tidbit there. So I hope it was helpful. Okay, Natalie, yes, there is only one plant identification app that I think people should be using because it is ran by botanists, and that is called Picture This. That one is really nice because it's just really nice. It's got warnings, it's got a lot of good information. They actually pay people to put correct information in there, whereas a lot of the other apps are kind of like Wikipedia where anybody can say anything on there, so there's a lot of false information. It's a good one, and you can pay extra to, if you have like a really weird plant and they can't ID it easily on the app, you can pay like 50 cents to $1 to ask a botanist, like one of their botanists, which is really cool. So, let's see. I think I've gotten to all the chat questions. Aha, okay. Next question. I'm hoping to harvest some mountain mint tomorrow. What are your favorite ways to work with her? Oh, like everything. This is one of my favorite plants, and I truly use it in every single way. And actually, I've been talking a lot about this, and it'll be in the next plant walk. Mountain mint and Monarda grow directly next to each other most of the time, not all the time. Monarda has a shorter season than mountain mint, and there's a few more varieties of mountain mint around me than there are Monarda. But right now, when the Monarda is in bloom, I see those two together a lot, and they have a lot of the same characteristics. So I feel like they are begging to be used together. So I've actually got some right here. Whoop. This is the Monarda that grows wild around here. It smells so good. And this is not the usual mountain mint that I harvest. This is the narrow leaf mountain mint here. Not quite as strong as the hoary mountain mint, which I prefer, but they're very much interchangeable. In fact, they're very similar. Those two mountain mints both have the really nice light lilac colored blooms, very similar in scent. So these are probably my top two. Well, I can't say that. The mint family is so big. But these are some of my favorite mint family members, we'll just say that. They both have very different characteristics. So, of course, they still have like the opposite leaves and the square stems like other mint family plants, but their smell and their taste is wild. It's not just minty, it's so much more complex. And I love it. Same with the smell. The first time that I found mountain mint, I wanted to burn it like sage, because it has very similar sagey flavor and scent going on there. And then Monarda has this crazy, like minty, oregano, peppery but sweet, crazy flavor and scent going on too. So anyways, to hone in on your actual question, mountain mint has such a good flavor that typically when I'm using it, I'm thinking about how to pull the flavor more so than what's the best way to get the medicinal uses, because the medicinal uses are there. That's a really strong ally with a lot of great medicinal properties. We talked about that one at the end of the June plant walk, and I'll actually be talking a little bit about it at the beginning of the July plant walk. But we can really guess with most mint family members that they have a lot of the same characteristics. And that's going to be, hold on, I need to check that my internet is not going to die before I dive into this. Okay, so that is going to be that they're incredibly bitter, incredibly high in volatile oils, and that tells us quite a few things. That it's going to be really good for activating mucosa, stimulating digestion, opening the respiratory, so many good things. Wonderful for not only digestion, but like stomach aches and complaints and soothing. So my favorite ways to use it, my most favorite way to enjoy it is tea. I love the flavor of mountain mint. I'm actually thinking about doing I'm revealing a potential Patreon gift here, but I'm actually thinking about doing a mountain mint and Monarda electuary, because that's another thing that I do every year is I infuse those plants in honey. They're so strongly flavored that they're really good at flavoring honey. And then the flavor of the honey is so strong that you could just about pour hot water over the honey alone and it's a cup of tea. But something I do every year when I strain the honey is I'm left with this like goopy, sticky pile of mountain mint and Monarda that still smells so good that I'm like, I can't just toss it. So I will typically boil it in a pot of water and make a really strong tea that's already sweetened from the honey. So that made me think, well, I might as well just preserve it by making it an electuary. And if you don't know what an electuary is, it's really simple. It's essentially just taking, rather than infusing honey with your herbs, you're incorporating your herbs into the honey by using a blender. Or if you have powdered herbs, you could just really stir it hard. But you really want an equal amount of herbs and honey. And the idea is that you can take a spoonful of the herbs and the honey, and pour hot water over it and make a tea without having to do any straining or anything like that. I do tincture mountain mint too. It's really, really good in any sort of, really anything for stomach complaints, respiratory complaints. It tastes really good, so it's in our mouth swish. Not only are we getting the really nice antiseptic, antibacterial properties from it in the mouth swish, but we're also getting that really nice minty flavor. Probably one of my, I think is a unique way to use it that I want to share with you is in burn bundles. So these plants have really strong stalks. These are pretty thin right here, but some of them are really thick, especially with the mountain mint. So what I will do is I will garble them. I'll take all the leaves and the flowers off to use later in teas and stuff. But then you still have this really nice big hardy stem that smells and tastes just as good. So I will put those in the core of burn bundles. So I save them, and then if I'm ever making bundles, I will put the plants around stems of mugwort, mountain mint, monarda, yarrow. Those are also really good stems for burning. Rosemary. I use a ton of stems in my smoke bundles just to kind of, no waste. And they smell really good. They also burn really well. In fact, the herbs that I was burning in the beginning of this video are all stems. From someone sent me red sage, someone sent me Russian sage, and someone sent some mugwort. And so I was using just the stems to burn, and I'm using these loose. It'd be better in a bundle, but they burn really nicely because they are strong. So that's one of my favorite ways to use the whole plant. And then the last thing I put was body oils. Using the mountain mint and monarda in body oils is really nice because that high content of the volatile oils is going to really help to increase blood flow and circulation, which are things that we really want from body oiling to support the lymphatic system and the nervous system. So the next question, I want to make sure I answer. Victoria asked, I'd love to know your favorite preparations for skullcap. I pretty much exclusively tincture skullcap. Reason being, skullcap is one of those plants that it doesn't have to be used fresh, but it really needs to be. It's one of my absolute favorite, most used plants. And so right now when it's in season and it's flowering, I like to tincture as much of it as I can so I have that nice fresh tincture of it all year round. You can put it in teas and other things, but it's so bitter, and it's only bitter, Mountain mint and monarda might be considered bitter, but they also have their own flavor that's really nice. Skullcap is just really bitter. So it's so intense in teas. So I just pretty much tincture it. I also do make a glycerin from it, a glycerite, for Augustine that he uses before bed or for stress or anxiety. So if you don't want to do an alcohol preparation, you could also infuse it into glycerin. You could probably do vinegar, but that for some reason just does not seem like a good combo to me. So the next question is herbal suggestions for teeth grinding. So I have a lot of herb suggestions for this, but just to go over a few non-herb suggestions. Well, these are still herb suggestions, but not directly. What's happening when you are grinding the teeth is typically it's stress induced, right? But what's physically happening is clenching, constricting, tightening, and then what's happening is spasms. And when you have clenched and contracted to the point of spasms, which is what's happening when you're grinding, things are very, very tight, basically. And what you really need to try to do is treat those spasms first, so then you can address the tightening and clenching. So what we're going to want to do is contracting, constricting, excitated muscles are typically a cold matter. So we're going to want to not only apply heat and warming herbs, but loosening herbs, relaxing things to relax the muscles. So drinking magnesium, a warm cup of magnesium before bed would be one of my number one suggestions. Also, magnesium controls tightness in the muscles, so it would be really great for that. Applying heat in any sort of way, whether you want to do an herbal steam, which would be really nice. Like, one thing that I thought you could do is make yourself a cup of tea from some of the herbs that I'll go over in a minute. And while you're steeping the tea, you could just kind of sit over it with a towel and just really take in the aroma of some of the herbs. But you could also, a heating pad might be weird, but if you've ever done the thing where you heat up a sock full of rice, having that right here would be really good. But probably what I would do is use something like our warming muscle rub comes to mind. Of course, you could make a warming oil at home, or find any other kind of warming salve, but something with those hot herbs like black pepper, cayenne, CBD, cardamom, clove, fir, spruce, camphorous hot herbs that you can really rub, like massaging our muscle rub or a warming oil into the jaw before bed is probably one of the best things you could do. So drinking magnesium, rubbing a salve or oil that's very warming are going to be some, but then let's move on to some of the herbs. Not only do we want to address the stress and anxiety that are likely causing the clenching, but we want to also use some antispasmodic herbs to help with the actual spasm part. That is something I would address more so topically. And another thing that comes to mind is our cramp salve that we make has antispasmodic herbs in it for muscle cramps. And so some of my favorite antispasmodic herbs to use are like wild yam and blue cohosh. You could also use like devil's claw. There's a few others, Jamaican dogwood bark. So if you were to make something yourself and you were to make a warming oil, you might include at least one antispasmodic herb. And then as far as like a good tea before bed, which I do think you could take a tincture, like something like our Rest in Peace that has skullcap, passion flower, hops, etc., would be great. But the warmth of tea would be really good, especially because it's hitting, the inside of your mouth and your jaw. And so some herbs you might include, sorry, my eye here, our Rest in Peace tea. And y'all, when I recommend my own products, I'm not saying use our products. I'm just like, these are things that I've made for stuff like this. So just thinking about the ingredients that are in those things. So let me pull up our Rest in Peace tea real quick. So our Rest in Peace tea has linden, motherwort, catnip, oat straw, lemon verbena, lemon balm, passion flower, wild lettuce, fennel, chamomile, and nutmeg. So just like really soothing, calming herbs. You could use lavender, chamomile, skullcap if you wanted to. I love catmint or lemon balm. I just think those are some really good herbs for not only relieving tension, anxiety, and stress, but also like promoting a good sleep where your body's not, clenching. Okay, I'm going to save that question for maybe last. Okay, so how to use wormwood. The real question is how to not go off on an entire tangent on the Artemisia family, because it is definitely one of my favorite categories of herbs. I think the Artemisia family is one of the most useful families of plants. I think everyone should have at least one in their garden, whether it's sweet Annie, wormwood, or mugwort, or some sort of, there's a lot of sages in the Artemisia family. So reason being, all of those plants contain a really incredibly high amount of thujone. Thujone is a chemical constituent that we can do too much of because it does its job really, really well. So it's not like a tonic herb where we want to take it long term. It's something where you want to use it to get the job done and then lay off. So if you were to use, a lot of people use wormwood as a bitters, and I do think that's great, but it's going to be one of those things where if you're building a bitters, maybe you're using, let's say, 6 herbs and wormwood is one of them. We're going to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and use like the tiniest amount of wormwood. So it's definitely a low dose, only need a little bit. Because of that high content of thujone. And so even though I'm going to answer your question about wormwood, everyone else listening, you can apply these same things to mugwort, sweet Annie, and black sage, some of those Artemisias. So the Artemisia family is very bitter, very, very, very bitter. Very aromatic. It's one of my favorite scents. And we see these are actually some of the oldest documented used herbs in Europe for so many things. But particularly in history, we see them used like when people were hunting and using questionable meat, where they didn't know if it had been, dead for a while, or any of the reasons you would question raw meat. People would cure it with Artemisia plants, but they would also make a bitters with Artemisia plants to take with it to make sure that if there was any parasites or any sort of overgrowth of bacteria, that they could kill it and digest that food well. So it's really strong and good for things like that, which is why we see it in ancient alcohols, like, what is it called? It's only like the most popular liqueur. Oh, come on. Absinthe. It's in absinthe. It used to be in gin. It's also in a few things. Internet going on my side. Okay, let me check it out. Okay, I think we're back. Sorry about that. Just so you guys know, if you've ever wondered why I have so many internet troubles, my internet is smaller than my phone, and it runs on cell phone service, and we are literally constantly turning off electronics and moving our internet all over the house to try to get like 2 bars. So my deepest apologies. Let me know if it's still bad, but I think I got it back up and running. So wormwood is a major anti-parasitic. That's the major takeaway. Typically things that are anti-parasitic are going to be really good for digestion because they're going to be really good at like clearing out all the junk. They're really strong herbs. These are in a lot of cleanses, and they can... Plants in the Artemisia family can get rid of things like tapeworms without using anything else, which is pretty incredible. So yeah, it was in absinthe, it was in a lot of those older drinks because it would like help keep people cleansed from intruders when that was a lot more of a problem because we didn't have refrigeration and, you know, all that stuff. How I use them though, aside from the uses, my favorite thing to do with wormwood and mugwort and sweet anise and black sage is to burn them. They have, because of that thujone, they have very, very strong anti-parasitic, antifungal, antiseptic, antibacterial, antiviral properties. So making a burn bundle from herbs like that, yarrow is another great like antimicrobial herb, and burning those in your house, it's not only going to make your house smell incredible, but it's going to literally help to clean the microbes in the air, to just literally cleanse the air. And so when I'm burning those kinds of herbs, I will put them like under clothing, under furniture, around our shoes, all kinds of things where we want to really clear that stuff out. I will even use them to smoke out my chicken coop, my goat pen, the cars if I feel like they're getting a little funky, you know, stuff like that. So I really love burning them. I will say I do not use any of them in tinctures that I take regularly because they're so strong. The taste is so strong. Same goes with teas. But I will occasionally hear from people throughout the year that their child has... children get worms, y'all. I know it's weird, but they do a lot. So I will hear from people throughout the year that their children have worms or their pets have worms, or they think that they have an overgrowth of candida or potentially a parasite, etc. And that's when I'm going to bust out the wormwood and the black walnut and the usnea and a lot of things that just don't taste great. So I keep them tinctured for those reasons, but I value them much more for their scent. I make an incredible Artemisia body oil that has black sage, wormwood, sweet anise, mugwort, and a little bit of mountain mint because I feel like mountain mint has a similar Artemisia smell. And I will say that's my favorite way to use all of those plants. That body oil smells so good. It's incredibly relaxing, and they all also have some really nice anti-inflammatory, pain-relieving properties. In fact, there are times where when I use our muscle rub a lot, especially for arthritis, things where I need like warming herbs. But if I'm like cramping or my neck is tight or something, rubbing that Artemisia oil gives me so much more relief than many other things. I really love it. Favorite music to listen to on the homestead. I'm gonna have to pull up my Spotify. So I will say we have some friends locally who have a really cool music videos, like trying to highlight smaller independent artists of the South. Well, not just the South, but focus on the South. And they're called Gems on VHS. It's a really, really cool thing that they're doing. And Gems on VHS has a wonderful YouTube playlist and Spotify playlist. And a lot of our friends are on there. A lot of really good country, folk, bluesy, so many, all the good stuff. Stax Records is probably our top favorite, so I listen to a lot of older playlists published by Stax Records. I also listen to a lot of soundtracks. So let's see. Just to give you an idea, if you're not familiar with Stax Records, STAX, Sam and Dave, Booker T and the MGs, the Staple Singers, Isaac Hayes, so good. Those are definitely like some of our favorite feel-good music. Let's see. But y'all know my number one is Lee Hazlewood. I absolutely love Lee Hazlewood. I love Nancy Sinatra. I love the Mamas and the Papas. A lot of that genre, the Woodstock peeps are my true faves. Karen Dalton, Townes Van Zandt, that's another favorite. And definitely old country and old bluegrass, but really like alternative psychedelic rock from the 60s and 70s. I pretty much like every single one of those. And then any sort of feel good Stax Records type stuff is also our number one. Okay, so I got a couple questions that were kind of similar, which is what can I put on a tick bite after the tick has been removed, and what can I put on a spider bite? So there's a few interesting things to note here. For the most part, non-poisonous bugs that bite you or suck your blood or any of those nasty things, they're not so much injecting you with poison like I think some people think. It's more so of a trade out. For example, ticks don't need the water in our blood. They just want the proteins and the enzymes. So they're sucking our blood and they're taking what they want and they're putting back what they don't want. And we actually don't know exactly how Lyme is transmitted, but we do have a theory that during that put back of the water in our blood, that the tick can also put that bacteria back into your bloodstream. So that said, putting something on a bite is not really, unfortunately, going to help pull it out because it's a direct exchange into the bloodstream. However, they can leave some nasty stuff on the surface of your skin. So if you just want to be, err on the side of caution, my recommendation would be to wipe the area with rubbing alcohol or witch hazel, and then you could apply plain old charcoal is definitely the best thing to draw. Same with salt, actually, if it's not like a painful wound. Any sort of clay, like bentonite clay, green clay, red clay, if you have any of that stuff around the house. And then pine sap and pine tar are some of my favorites for drawing out infection of any kind. So if you happen to have our black drawing salve at home, you could absolutely apply that to any sort of bite, bee sting, mosquito bite, any of that stuff, to just try to pull some of that inflammation and make sure that there's nothing, no nastiness left there. So let's see. The next question, would love to know if there are herbal remedies to alleviate heavy legs and varicose veins. They assume it's due to premenopause, her job, she has to be standing most of the time, and lack of physical exercise. I honestly think that varicose veins are just inevitable for some. I have them all over, and I do believe that it's probably from being a server for the first half of my life and standing on my feet in bad shoes all the time. But I also think that varicose veins have a lot to do with genetics. The biggest thing you want to think about, though, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. A lot of bigger varicose veins are going to be from burst blood vessels and like relaxed veins. They're like not really doing their job, so they've kind of gone flaccid, and that's when we really see them. So what you want to do is revive the vein. You want healthy, strong veins rather than approaching it from a place of like, how do I hide them? Which if you do want to hide them, tattoos are a great way to do that. So there's some herbs you can take internally, and there's some things you can apply topically. So one thing I wanted to mention is I have a tonifying spray that I make. I typically end up giving it to women post-birth to help tighten and tone the vaginal tissues and also to help with hemorrhaging. But this is also something that could be applied topically to burst blood vessels of any kind, not just varicose veins, but there's some other issues that are the result of burst blood vessels. And so what we want to do with those like relaxed, atrophied muscles and veins and tissues is we want to tighten and tone them back up. So what type of herbs tighten and tone? If this was truly live and I didn't have lagging internet, I would love for this to be a pop quiz where I could give someone a prize. But that's how I really want you guys to think, and I will record my energetics class soon, and by the end of that class, you will be able to answer these types of questions. So anyways, the answer to that question is astringent herbs. Astringent herbs help to tighten and tone relaxed tissues and muscles and whatnot. So the recipe for the spray that I make has nettle, chickweed, cinquefoil or agrimony, and raspberry. I forgot if I said lemon balm. Raspberry and blackberry are going to be some of my top choices for astringent herbs. They are really, really good at doing the job both internally and topically. So Go-To Cola has been researched a lot specifically for varicose veins because it contains a chemical, let's see if I wrote that name down. I didn't, but it contains a chemical constituent that helps with collagen production and elasticity. So Go-To Cola is great, but like a lot of herbs that are going to be good for building collagen and elasticity will also be good. So just keep that in mind. Let's see. Go-To Cola stimulates the production of collagen and elastin. These connective tissues are needed to strengthen the internal lining and walls of the veins. Having stronger veins means fewer varicose veins. So yeah, that would be... I see that 2 people answered that question before I answered it. So awesome job. It's funny because, I mean, you'll see when you hear me say that just now, but I'm seeing your messages like probably a whole 3 minutes later. One day, y'all, I'm actually really hoping, not to get off topic, but I'm really hoping that when I find an office space, hopefully in the next month or 2, that I will be able to have legit internet that plugs into the wall of my house. Well, not my house, my office. And I can do the live Q&As there because that would make me really happy. Maybe even do some Skype classes. So yeah, that would be my recommendation with varicose veins. Question: the tightening and toning astringent, can it be used on hemorrhoids? Yes, absolutely. That is a perfect example of what it's for. That spray that I just mentioned, it is wonderful for that. So if you wanted to make something at home, you definitely don't have to use all of these herbs, but some recommendations would be nettle, cinquefoil or agrimony, raspberry or blackberry. Yarrow is a really, really good one. Really, agrimony, cinquefoil, that would be at the top of my list for astringents and tonifying herbs. Okay. Oh, my internet looks like it's maybe going back out. Come on. Okay, and I'm back. All right, so this is the last oh, looks like it's going back out again. I've got one more question, but actually wanted to say one more thing about the varicose veins and heavy legs. If what you mean by heavy legs is like restless legs, which is something that I deal with a lot, magnesium, and I would be using it internally and topically. Taking some magnesium before bed in a drink, y'all know I love the Calm supplement for magnesium, would be really, really good for relieving some of that pain, but also finding a magnesium spray or lotion to apply topically to the legs would be wonderful too. And then getting a really nice magnesium soak for taking a bath in would also be wonderful. I see the question, raspberry, blackberry leaves or roots more astringent? You could actually use the leaves, the stalks, the roots. You could even use the dingberries. So as far as which part's going to be the most astringent, that's going to go back to that analogy that I use about which part of the plant do you want to harvest when. So if the plant is fruiting, then the leaves are not going to be quite at their prime anymore, and the roots are definitely not going to be prime because all of the energy of that plant is working on fruiting and then going to seed. So in the spring, before the raspberry and blackberry fruits, the leaves are the absolute best part to harvest. As they're going into the fruiting stage, you could use, if you're brave enough, I know that that's a painful chore, and then in the fall you can cut those back and dig up the roots for getting those astringent properties. I'm on the last question and my internet looks like it's not doing so hot, so I'm gonna try to just power through, and I'm just gonna check on it one more time. All right, last question. What are your top 5 to 10 essential tonic herbs, safe and effective for everyday use? So the first 4 that came to mind are all mint family plants. Cat mint, lemon balm, skullcap, and mountain mint. But then I've also got milky oats, motherwort, and nettle. This question being my favorite essential tonic, safe, and effective herbs, those are going to be my most used herbs, because tonic herbs, for those who don't know, are herbs that are gentle enough for daily and long-term use. So these are going to be things like milky oats, where you can really build on it. It's even better to take it long term and to take it regularly and to take as much of it as you can, really. So these are really safe herbs that you can give to children and animals. So particularly yarrow, just being a gentle herb with so many uses for like injuries, rashes. It's a good bitter herb. Actually, I'm not on the last question. I forgot I saved a really big one for last about the microbiome. So I got one more after this. I just remembered that because yarrow is a really good bitter herb and an astringent herb. Yarrow is also an antimicrobial, antibacterial, antiseptic. So that's a good multifunctional herb. Motherwort is just one of my favorite allies for softening, soothing. It's a really, really good one to give, well, not just to children, but to adults, to everyone if they're feeling blue or stuck or stagnant. Skullcap is probably my most used herb for anxiety and tension and stress. And then, of course, herbs like catmint, lemon balm, milky oats. Those are going to just be things that I'm trying to take and incorporate into my teas and daily routine as often as possible, just to support my central nervous system, my endocrine system, to help build my resistance to stress and anxiety, and to just support overall function. And then of course I included mountain mint because, like yarrow, it's so multifunctional, good for stomach complaints, respiratory complaints. It's good for cooling you off on hot days. It tastes good. It's going to stimulate digestion and keep everything flowing. And then of course nettle is always going to be on that list. Similar to milky oats, it just provides a lot of vitamin and mineral content. You can eat it, you can drink it, you can powder it, you can take it in a tincture, a supplement, a vinegar. So these are all very safe, effective, good for building the vitamin and mineral content and just supporting all the systems of the body. Okay, before I go into the microbiome question, which, let me find it real quick. Okay. I see a question in the chat room. Is it possible to harvest the root on plants and not kill it? Definitely. I've taken one video on this that you can find on my IGTV. I will take another one this fall. But a good example, I harvest the roots of nettle every year, marshmallow every year, wild yam, comfrey, anyways, well, that's enough to talk about. And yes, basically, so the video on my IGTV is me piecing out wild yam roots. Another one that I do a lot is Maidenhair Fern, and these roots are really tough and at the surface of the soil, so it's actually quite easy to very, very gently use a hand shovel around the plant to just loosen the soil and kind of pry the plant up. Then from there you can see how many different clusters of roots there are under the soil, and from there you can piece them out and decide if you want to. I mean, really my point of action is, if I'm harvesting a cluster of roots, say there's 5, I might take 2 of those and leave 3 in the ground, and you would just, tuck them back in, tighten the soil around them. If I'm digging up one plant, like my marshmallow plant that's really strong, or my horseradish plant, I will dig that up. And those specifically, I can't think of the name right now of the 2 different kinds of roots, but we've got like horseradish and marshmallow that typically have like 1 to 2 burdock, yellow dock major roots. If anyone knows the name of that, drop it in the chat box for me. And then they'll have little trickling things coming off of that root, and one thing you could do is just clip all those off. Specifically when I harvest yellow dock and burdock, there's typically a few of those big root channels, and I can clip one off and plant one back in the ground. Roots are really good at growing. Plants are really good at growing, especially if you leave them in the environment that you found them. Just loosen that soil, try not to damage the root with your shovel, and when you pull that plant up, it's pretty easy to intuitively go, okay, I'm not just gonna like chop the root in half, although you could do that too, honestly, but more strategically, if there's a couple roots, clip from the side of it, or clip the legs of it. It's a lot easier to show this in a video, so definitely take a look at that video if you can. Oh, but that said, another thing to visualize is like green onions and other like culinary foods, like potatoes and stuff that you can plant after you eat, like the eye of a potato, or green onions, you cut the top off, you stick them in water, and they regrow roots. So a lot of times things like beets, if you're cutting a beet, you can take that beet top and put it in the ground, and those roots will reform. Thank you so much. Taproot is going to be that big long root that's got the legs that you can cut off of it. So let's move on to the last question, which is thoughts on using herbs to nourish and support the microbiome. Now, I told myself that I would not go longer than an hour and a half, so we got 10 minutes to dive into this question. But I do want to start by saying I am trying to figure out if I'm going to do a whole class video on this, or if I'm going to release a few smaller videos on Patreon about this, but it's something that I'm consumed by right now. I mean, I've been aware, of course, of just how much the gut microbiome in particular affects so many other parts of the body, but there is specifically some research happening right now with the vagus nerve and the gut microbiome that's just really mind-blowing, and I think could truly change the world, particularly America. But someone made a good point the other day, which was that a lot of other cultures cherish bitter foods, and so they were asking, do they need to use a bitters? And I mean, we all need to incorporate bitters into our diet, whether through food or through drink or through taking a bitters, but cultures who already have that as a part of their diet and didn't steer away from it by doing what we did here in the US, and of course other parts of the world too, where we began modifying our vegetables and fruits to become sweeter and less tart and less bitter. I really think that a lot of that is where we started to trash the gut microbiome, and you know, it's pretty obvious through statistics and studies that as a whole, our population in the last 100 years has more recently become fatter, more depressed, more sluggish, less energy, a lot of heart problems and health issues. And of course, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But I think more than blaming it on food, we do need to start centraling our gut microbiome and our vagus connection, because if we can strengthen those and support those with herbs, then we can better adapt to what is inevitable, unfortunately. And so I have a friend who has 2 children who have a hard time detoxing. Their detox systems of the body are not quite strong enough or fast enough to rid themselves of the toxins that are constantly attacking them just by existing every day. And of course, it's going to depend on the drinking water in your area, that same water that's also watering the foods that you're eating in your area, that you're showering and bathing in. If you're near a GMO soy or cornfield or a cotton fields and the chemicals that they spray on them are fucking awful. So if you live near any of these major industries and you are ingesting those chemicals through the water and the food you eat and the air you breathe, that is more important in affecting your body more so than just eating bad foods that don't have bitter flavor components, if you know what I mean. So unfortunately, I've had a lot of friends and people that I've worked with who have this mentality of like, I'm eating everything right. I cut out dairy, I cut out gluten, I only eat this kind of food, blah, blah, blah. And they just feel so frustrated because they have centered their health, they've done all the right moves, and yet they're still sick and recovering. And what I try to explain to them is that, first off, it's not your fault. You don't have to think that way of like, I've done all the right things, I'm doing what I'm supposed to. It is not about you and what you are doing. This is such a huge conversation that goes into class structure and so many other things, but take that out of your language. It is not your fault. And what we can be doing is learning how to support those systems of the body that are affected most. And so it's important and I'm glad all this research is happening, because like, okay, everyone's all obsessed with the gut microbiome, taking a good probiotic, supporting it, etc. But there are so many other factors that contribute to poor digestive health, like toxins, and so many other things. So we need to make sure that we're also supporting the lymphatic system, the liver, the kidneys, our major, detox pathways, our vagus nerve, which is what I really am excited to talk about more in another video. So as far as supporting it with herbs, if you are not incorporating bitter foods or bitter herbs into your diet, that would be my absolute number one first recommendation. And then another thing that I like to challenge people to think about is, typically people veer more towards like spicy, tart foods in their diet, hot foods, and then some people eat a lot of like salads and smoothies and those colder foods, and really both are fine, but we need a good balance. So if you are someone who veers towards hot, spicy foods, a lot of snacking on dry things like crackers, you want to incorporate a lot of wet, cooling, moistening herbs like marshmallow and violet and cleavers and chickweed to support your detoxification systems. If you're someone who eats a lot of cooling wet foods like the salads and the smoothies and whatnot, make sure you're taking like a turmeric tincture or incorporating some golden milk or some spices into your diet somewhere. So other than that, supporting the detox systems through herbs, we've talked in previous videos a lot last month about how to support the lymphatic system. I think we talked a lot last month's live Q&A about detoxification through the liver and kidneys too. I could talk more about that, and I need to talk more about that. But bitters first and foremost would be my number one thing. Another thing that I think that people don't attribute to gut health but should is iron. Fiber is something that we did used to really focus on in the diet as being crucial, and it's kind of slowed down. So soluble fibers, oh crap, something just flashed through my head. Soluble fibers. Oh, helping support vitamin and mineral absorption. So I talked a lot about that in the spring because we had a lot of those herbs that are rich in soluble fibers like violet, clovers, chickweed, etc. Now that those aren't as readily available, we need to be incorporating rich fibrous foods into the diet to help us absorb those nutrients. If you are not incorporating any high fiber herbs or foods into your diet, your body is not storing fuel